Ari Aster doesn't cut away from discomfort, he lingers on it. Watch as he holds on Annie's appalled face, and on Peter's fixed stare, and on Steve's helpless avoidance for longer than most modern directors would dare to. He's forcing you to sit in the silence with them. You're not allowed to get up and leave the table, and that changes everything, because you're no longer watching a family's tension through a lens. You are pushing your own cold broccoli around your plate like they are. Happening, folks. Today we are going to talk about Hereditary, which happens to be one of my favorite films. And I want to focus on something very specific that I think most of us have probably lived through ourselves to varying degrees. Picture this. You're at the dinner table eating dinner with all your loved ones, and it's very quiet. Except it's not a tranquil quiet, it's a very heavy quiet. And the weight is coming from all of the things everybody at that table knows to never speak about. Maybe these things are rooted in resentment, or maybe they are rooted in grief, or maybe it's about something that happened a few years ago that's never been properly addressed. Maybe you just don't love the person sitting across the table from you anymore. And so, like everybody else at the table, you push your cold broccoli around on your plate with your fork and you pretend this quiet is normal. But the real horror Aster is capturing isn't the silence itself. It's the exhaustion of maintaining the silence. The way that pretending everything is fine can actually be more draining than the argument you're trying to avoid. How many conversations have you sidestepped because you told yourself it was just easier to keep the peace? But that's not peace. That is a truce you've signed with your own resentment. And the cost of that truce is often the very connection you're trying to preserve. I think Ari Aster understands that silence better than any modern director. He knows what it costs to maintain it, and he knows what happens when it finally collapses under its own weight. So, I'm going to take you through what I think Hereditary's true horror is, and to wrap things up later, I'm going to give you my take on what really happens at the end of this movie. Every family has a permanently locked room, or a subject that just isn't talked about. Maybe it's a name that changes the temperature of the air when somebody says it. And for the Graham family, it's kind of everything. It's Annie's mother. It's what happened to Annie's brother. It's the night Annie stood over Peter with a match and paint thinner. And it's Charlie, and how she was raised, or who she belonged to, and why she was sent to a party with Peter. This family has spent decades not talking about the things that literally define them both as individuals and as family members in relation to each other, and they have built an entire life on that silence. They have a beautiful home and successful careers and a normal suburban existence that looks like an expertly crafted diorama, at least from the outside. But Aster understands a house can look perfect from the outside and still be a prison. He shoots the Graham home the way Annie builds her dioramas, in wide, still, static frames that turn rooms into tiny little boxes. The camera often sits back, unmoving, as if we are looking at a miniature. And it's a way of saying these people are arranged in this space, and something has arranged them. The dollhouse aesthetic isn't just a visual quirk, it's the entire philosophical lens of the film. You can see the weight of their silence all over Annie's face. It's the way she holds herself and constantly exhales to punctuate her sentences. It's the way she looks at her son. There is love there, but it's way more complicated than that. Because for Annie, love is an equal mix of devotion and terror. And Peter is a constant reminder of the night she tried to kill him and of the mother she's afraid she's inherited. Peter is a living, breathing reminder of everything Annie has ever tried to bury. And we all know the things we try to bury never stay buried long. When Charlie dies, it happens so fast we don't really process it. One moment she's gasping for air, and the next, her head is gone, and Peter's just sitting there with the engine running and his eyes fixed forward. And what makes the sequence so devastating isn't just what Peter does, it's what Aster refuses to show us. He doesn't cut to the pole, he doesn't give us the impact, he just places us in the car with Peter, in the heavy, dead quiet of the aftermath. Aster forces us to imagine what happened, and what our minds conjure is far worse than anything he could have filmed. It's a filmmaking decision that respects the horror and the numbness. And by denying us the spectacle, he makes us feel the shock. And then, Peter drives home, and he goes to bed. And I have thought about this moment more than any other moment in this film. And this film has a lot of moments. Peter doesn't scream, he doesn't call anyone, he doesn't drag his sister's body out of the car. He just parks and walks inside. Then he lies down and waits for the morning. It's not that he doesn't care, it's that this moment is too enormous to acknowledge. If he acknowledges it, it becomes real. The next morning, we hear Annie long before we see her. If you've ever heard a sound like that coming out of someone, it's not something you will ever forget. When I was in college, I was the first on the scene to a quadruple fatality car accident. It happened literally right in front of me. I was the only witness in the court case, and the sounds from that night still bounce around inside my head. One of the victims was 8 months pregnant, and out of total shock, I tried administering CPR to somebody that was long gone. It's not screaming, and it's definitely not crying. It's more like the sound of a person breaking in a way that can't ever be repaired. Toni Collette didn't perform grief in these scenes, she inhabited it. She became a vessel for the most unbearable pain any parent could possibly experience. And watching her, you understand something terrible. This is what the silence was protecting. This is what the family structure was built to contain. And now, that container has blown apart. On a bit of a personal side note to the Oscars selection committee, Toni Collette blew away anything any of your overrated, overpaid pals could have pulled off in this role. And she wasn't nominated for anything because you all know that. Grief can do strange things to people, whether you are grieving the death of a loved one or even grieving the death of the love from a loved one. And one of the strangest things is that it often arrives wearing the face of blame, because grief is too big to hold on to yourself, and you need somewhere to put it. The people closest to you are usually right there. To me, Hereditary's dinner scene is the most honest portrayal of family pain I have ever seen in a horror movie. Period. It starts with silence, because of course that's what this family that's what lots of families do. They sit in silence and they eat, and they say nothing but the empty chair. Aster shoots this scene like a pressure cooker. The camera starts at a distance with the family arranged around the table like a still life. And then, as facial expressions inevitably lead to accusations, the camera starts to push in, until Toni Collette's face fills the frame and there's nowhere else to look. And again, Aster is making us sit in the silence we just watched Annie shatter. And then Annie speaks, and all the resentment and accusations and fury she's been holding back comes pouring out. And she blames Peter. She says it's all his fault. And this is coming from a woman who also tells him she never wanted to be his mother. These are all things that can't be unsaid or unheard, even though they've definitely been felt all along. But Peter fires back. He says she forced Charlie to go to the party, and he insinuates she handed her daughter to her own mother and checked out. And he's not wrong. And she's not wrong. And neither of them are right either. This is why things feel so incredibly tense. This is why this family chooses silence instead. This also epitomizes Ari Aster's remarkable writing ability. At a setting as intimate and condensed as a family dinner table, they're constantly hurting each other because the pain has nowhere else to go. Steve sits between them, saying nothing, as always. He is numb and paralyzed by this elongated, years-long routine. He wants to fix it, but even as a successful psychiatrist, he has no idea how to. But Steve's ineffectuality serves a deceptively significant purpose at this table. How many of us have been Steve? How many of us have been forced to sit in silence and watch our loved ones tear each other to pieces as we felt totally and utterly helpless? And then Annie says it.
I am your mother!
She screams it, but it doesn't sound like a typical claim of authority. And I'd invite you to interpret this from a slightly different angle. To me, it sounds like an accusation, like motherhood itself is a punishment she's been sentenced to. It's a role she never wanted to play. She's a part of this family chain now, and she can't break away from it. The way Aster frames that moment, with her face contorted and Peter shrunk and wounded across the table, is genius, because it doesn't allow us to take a side. And that moment resonates because so many of us have felt it from one side of the table or the other. From the parent who suddenly realizes they have become their own mother or father, to the child who looks across the table and sees somebody who maybe shouldn't have had children at all. That's not a horror movie monster. That's a real human, devastating truth. If you've been on either side of that table, you know what comes after that explosion. There is shame and regret, and the exhausted quiet that is even worse than the silence was before. Astor isn't showing us this to judge the Graham family. He's showing us because he knows that sometimes the only way to see a pattern in our own lives is to watch it destroying someone else's. And so, if you saw yourself in that scene either as Annie or as Peter or as Steve, who is frozen and helpless, or maybe, more often than not, you are starting to find yourself sat next to a partner you no longer feel pulled towards. Maybe the recognition you're getting from this film is kind of a gift. Maybe it's a sign the silence in your own home needs to be broken before it shatters, the way this one did. At Annie's grief support group, she finally reveals the truth about her family. She talks about her father's psychotic depression and her brother's suspected schizophrenia and his suicide note blaming their mother. And as she's speaking, you realize something. Paimon, the demon in this movie, and the cult, all of it is literally window dressing to the real horror in this story. The real horror Annie is living with is the fear that she's broken in the same way her family was broken, that mental illness has passed through her bloodstream like a poison. She builds these elaborate, intricate scenes in these miniature houses because she has to be able to control something in her life. And within her little dioramas, the pieces stay exactly where she put them. Once she's created a scene, it never changes. Nothing ever collapses or decays, and nobody can ever say anything that they can't take back. But Astor's camera keeps reminding us of the opposite, that she is in someone else's diorama entirely. The film's frequent overhead shots looking straight down like a blueprint make the Grahams look like pieces on a board. They are not the architects of their own lives, and they never have been. You can't live in a diorama, and you can't control real life the way you can control a miniature. And Annie knows that, and that knowledge is what's actually destroying her. And what makes Hereditary so difficult for us in the audience and so true to real life is that Annie's fear is not irrational. She's right to be afraid. The patterns in the history is all there. She has every reason to believe she's carrying something dangerous inside her, and the people she loves most are the people most likely to be hurt by it. That is the inheritance. That is what's hereditary. It's not Paimon the demon, and it's not the crown that's eventually passed down. The true thing being inherited by this family is damage. And you can't exercise damage. You can only survive it. Or not. And this is where things can get uncomfortable because we all want to believe that we are different and that we've done the work and that the patterns our parents handed us have been thoroughly examined and disarmed. But Annie believed that too. She went to therapy. She built a career. She built a home that looked nothing like her childhood. And still, when the pressure came, she discovered her mother's voice coming out of her mouth. And so, the question the film's asking is not, are you cursed? It is, what have you inherited that you swore you would never pass on? And more importantly, is the silence around that inheritance making it stronger? The final act of Hereditary is often described as a descent into supernatural chaos, and on its surface, that's what it is. There's a possession and multiple decapitations and a coven of naked cultists worshipping a demon king they summoned themselves and resurrected. But I want to offer you a different way of seeing it. It's a slightly quieter way, and I would suggest it's probably truer to life. I think what actually happens at the end of this movie is that Annie finally gives up. She spent her entire life fighting her family history and fighting her own mind and fighting the fear that she's becoming her mother. And then, in the attic, with Peter begging for his life, she stops. The thing she was always afraid of, that she was dangerous, that she was broken, that she would eventually destroy the people she loved, well, that's finally happened. And for her, there's almost a relief in it. The worst thing has occurred, and now there's nothing really left to fear. If you've been here before, you know I enjoy pushing the envelope from time to time. Can you think of a better way to symbolize a person's deep desire to no longer have to think about all their problems than the removal of their own heads? Think about it. And I think Peter's journey is similar too. He spent the film carrying an impossible weight, from his guilt over Charlie to the terror of his wildly volatile mother to the suffocating pressure of being a high school kid who has to hold everything together while his family crumbles all around him. And by the end, all of that is stripped away. His body, his face, his literal identity becomes a vessel for something else entirely. Now, I admit it's a very bleak prospect, but it also marks the end to all the pain and the suffering for both of them. And if you really think about it, how else was it going to happen? They have a successful psychiatrist cooking dinner for them. And finally, Ari Aster takes the purest symbol of childhood escape, the treehouse, and he turns it into a throne room for one of the kings of hell. This is his final symbolic corruption of the family unit. After everything safe has been hollowed out and gutted and burnt to a grizzle, the crown goes on its rightful head and the worshipping begins. And as macabre and delightfully demonic as this closing scene is, the Graham family, in the most twisted way imaginable, is finally at peace. Hereditary isn't trying to scare you with demons. It is trying to tell you something about what it means to get hurt by the people who tell you they love you. And it's about how impossible it is to break some cycles, and how sometimes, despite every effort you make to bridge vast gaps and to hold on to that one person you love, the damage in them can still devastate you. But here's what I think Ari Aster is really asking us to contemplate. Heyman wasn't invited into the Graham house, he was already there. He was in the silence at their dinner table, and he was in their resentment, and he was in their fear. The cult didn't create the darkness in the Graham family, they just used it as an invitation into their lives. And for anybody who might have recognized themselves or their families in any aspect of this movie, the real question isn't whether or not you've got a demon stealing piano strings up in your attic. It's whether or not something's been passed down to you that might have been running the show this whole time without your permission. Because unlike the Graham family, you are not a piece on a board. You're not in somebody else's diorama. You are capable of looking at your own inheritance and deciding what you want to keep and what you want to set on fire. That's the difference. It's the hope this story does not give to its characters. Maybe, if you're willing to look in the mirror for a while, this story can give you that hope. And maybe the first step in all of this is just saying that thing out loud to the person next to you on the couch or sitting across from you at the dinner table. Until next time, folks.